Hello and welcome. I am so glad that you are here today. We're continuing in our study of the book of Judges and we'll be looking at Judges chapter 20 today. So grab yourself a cuppa and we'll get started. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to reading some of your comments. A trigger warning for today is that this study will contain references to genocide of a people group. Commentators suggest that these final chapters are added in after the recordings of the judges that were in the earlier chapters, and they suggest that these stories were added in to highlight the depravity of Israel at this time. So verse 1, then all Israel, actually I'll start then, first word, it says then, which implies there was something that went on beforehand, which is obviously Judges chapter 19. So if you haven't seen my video on Judges chapter 19, go back and watch that. It'll give you a lot of context for this chapter. It's not easy, so I won't go into a lot of detail about Judges chapter 19 here, other than there is a Levite, so he's an Israelite from the tribe of Levite, and he gave his concubine to be gang raped by some Benjaminite men. So the Benjaminites were also Israelites, and she died as a result of that horrible treatment. So if you've got the stomach for it, go back and watch chapter 19 and it will give you a lot of context for Judges chapter 20. So verse 1, again, let's try again. Then all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, from the land of Gibeah, came together as one and assembled before the Lord at Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their place in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 men armed with swords. And the Benjaminites heard the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. Then the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing had happened." So upon hearing of the Levite's concubine's death, the Israelites were deeply grieved and outraged. They gathered as one man, they were united with 400 foot soldiers who drew the sword. So they met at Mizpah to address the situation and to seek justice. Now, Israel's unfaithfulness had spiraled out of control. They were now planning on fighting against their own people. And so sometimes blatant rebellion against God can cause disunity amongst God's people. Verse 4. So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, "I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin and spent the night. During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded my house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine and she died." So the Levite, he tells a half-truth or an abbreviated version. The Levite conveniently leaves out the fact that he gave his concubine to these wicked and perverted men of Gibeah. Perhaps he wanted to look like the hero, or at least look like an innocent victim. And there seems to be an element of self-preservation. Verse 6, "I took my concubine, I cut her into pieces, and I sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance, because they committed this lewd and outrageous act in Israel. Now all you Israelites, speak up and tell me what you have decided to do." So after the Levite's concubine dies from this terrible, terrible treatment, the Levite dismembers her body and sends out her remains to the other tribes. To describe this sin, the original Hebrew word encompasses sort of a vileness or a senseless, disgraceful folly. It says it's sort of immoral, it's profane, it's lewd, and it's disgraceful. This never should have happened to this concubine. She never should have been gang raped by people in her own nation and then die because of it. And then, as if she wasn't disrespected enough in her life, she's now disrespected in her death and dismembered and sent throughout all Israel. The Levite then calls upon the leaders of Israel, "Speak up and tell me what you have decided to do." It is as if he's saying, this vile thing is happening in Israel. You need to address it. Now, what are you going to do about it? And partly, what are you going to do about this problem that he was partly responsible for, which he leaves out that detail. But perhaps the first step of this Levite should have been to speak up way before. He should have spoken up much, much earlier in Gibeah when these men were pounding on the door. As a representative of the tribe of Levi, he should have spoken up against this lewd and outrageous act in Israel. Then if they didn't listen, then he should have approached the leaders of Israel. And he seems to sort of just wash his hands of the involvement in the issue. It's like he's saying, you guys need to sort out this issue. It's your problem, even though I was complicit in it. This is not at all an invitation for us to hate on men. There are many, many honouring men in our society, and I don't want us to think in any way that all men are like this, not at all. Verse 8, all the men rose up together as one, saying, none of us will go home, not one of us will return to his house, but now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against them in the order decided by casting of lots. We will take the men out of every 100. We will take 10 men out of every 100 from the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, and 1,000 from 10,000, and get provisions for this army. When the army arrives in Gibeah in Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for this outrageous act done in Israel. So all the Israelites got together, and they were united as one against the city. So in unity, all the men of Israel, they came together. They were united as one. And this demonstrates a level of great unity in the people of God, and it showed that the leaders did not want to tolerate such behaviour or let it grow unchallenged in their community. They were not going to finish their meeting until they had solved the problem. So they decided to take 10% of all the men to compile an army, and they will fight against the men in Gibeah and give them what they deserve for this outrageous act in Israel. Israel was going to fight their own people. So Judges 20 verse 10, it says, we want to give them what they deserve. The King James Version says we want to repay all the vileness for what they have done in Israel. So do you think this was extreme or valid or a proper fulfillment of God's command to Israel? Let's read Deuteronomy 13. So we're going to go back to the Torah, to the law. Deuteronomy 13. God is saying, if you hear it is said about one of the towns of the Lord your God is giving you to live in, that there are troublemakers have arisen among you and have led the people in that town astray, saying, let us go worship other gods, gods you have not known. Then you must inquire, you must probe, and you must investigate it thoroughly. And if it is true that it has been proved that this is a detestable thing that has been done among you, you must certainly put to the sword all who live in that town. You must destroy it completely, both its people and its livestock. You are to gather all the plunder from the town in the middle of the public square and completely burn down the town and the plunder and as a burnt offering to the Lord. That town will remain a ruin forever, never to be rebuilt, and none of the condemned things are to be found in your hands. Then the Lord will turn from his fierce anger. He will show mercy. He will give compassion to you. He will increase your numbers, as promised the oath to your ancestors, because you obey the Lord your God by keeping his commandments I'm going to give you today, by doing what is right in his eyes. So let's have a look at this command, really, in Deuteronomy. Instead of doing what is right in his eyes, as commanded in this Deuteronomy passage at the very last verse, in verse 18, Israel at the time of Judges was constantly doing what is right in their own eyes. They are convinced that the 11 tribes, are we convinced that the 11 tribes inquired and probed and investigated thoroughly, as it's suggested in verse 14? They certainly didn't know the whole story, since the Levite had purposefully left out some significant details, like the fact that his concubine was given to these men. Later on, we see that the Israelites did not put to the sword all who lived in that town. They did more than that. We'll look at that in verse 48. Verse 12, the tribes of Israel sent messages throughout the tribe of Benjamin saying, what about this awful crime that was committed among you today? Now turn these wicked men of Gibeah over to us so that we may put them to death and purge this evil from Israel. But the Benjaminites wouldn't listen to their fellow Israelites. So the Israelites, they call on the Benjaminites to surrender just those wicked men of Gibeah who had committed this crime of gang rape and basically murder. They demanded that these men be handed over for judgment and executed. So the original request was just these men, which is what was required in Deuteronomy. So it's an important step for the nation of Israel to take because they sought to honour God and bring justice for the actions of those men in Gibeah. But the Benjaminites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. And this is tragic because the Benjaminites chose to go to battle against their own people, initiating a civil war. And the reaction for this civil war was because they were defending wicked behaviour of these men in Gibeah. Verse 14. From their towns they came together at Gibeah and fought against the Israelites. At once the Benjaminites mobilised 26,000 swordsmen from their town, in addition to 700 able young men from those living in Gibeah. Among all the soldiers, there were 700 select troops who were left-handed. Each of them could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. They were elite warriors. So a little bit of a tangent here. Let's look at some what left-handedness looked like here in Israel. So there were 700 select Benjaminite soldiers that held an advantage because of their left-handedness. We studied this back in Judges 3 when we studied Ehud. So the Hebrew word for left-handed is used twice in the Old Testament, and both times it's used here in Judges, and both times it's used as in military terms in that context. The first we see it in Judges 3:15 to describe Ehud. He was also from the tribe of Benjamin, and the second time it's mentioned is obviously here in Judges chapter 20. The Benjaminites had a disproportionate percentage of left-handed people in their population, and being left-handed or even ambidextrous put them at a strategic advantage against their right-handed opponents, which would be used as a very effective military strategy. And the fact that all the left-handed men mentioned are always Benjaminites. So this offers some irony because the name Benjamin actually means son of my right hand. See Genesis chapter 35 verse 18. As she, which is Rachel's the father of Benjamin, and she dies while giving birth to him. As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. But his father named him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So Benjamin's father was very wise. He didn't want to give him a name that had that sort of lingering sorrow for his whole life, but he named him father of my right hand, which was a much more stronger name. But it's ironic because many Benjamites were left-handed. So left-handedness, the advantages of left-handedness. Left-handed individuals had a strategic advantage in arm-to-arm combat, as right-handed opponents were often unprepared for their approach and their technique. Left-handed swordsmen would strike from unexpected angles, exploiting the fact that their movements differed from their right-handed combatants. Later we see this advantage play out when 26,700 Benjaminite soldiers was able to strike down 30,000 men. So they were able to strike down more men than what the number of soldiers they had. Now they had a slingshot as well, is mentioned in this verse, and they could sling this slingshot or sling the stone from the slingshot to split a hair. So ancient Israelites slingers were skilled warriors, and they used slings and stones as very effective weapons. The sling was simple, but it was a very powerful tool. It was common in the side of the hands of shepherds and soldiers alike. So we're not talking about a little Y-shaped slingshot that you may have played with as a kid. This is a leather pouch with a stone, probably as big as your fist. And so it was used to propel this stone at for a length of about 180 metres at a velocity of about 240 kilometres an hour. And so to put this in perspective, elite baseball players, they can pitch only 150 kilometres an hour. And so here you've got these Benjaminite soldiers slinging stones, not baseballs, at 240 kilometres an hour, much more than what a baseballer can throw at 150 kilometres an hour. So the slingers, they were so precise that they could aim and hit a hair from that distance away and split it. Amazing feat. Verse 17. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fit for battle. So the tribe of Benjamin's willingness to engage in war against a force of 40,000 soldiers when they only had 26,000 swordmen demonstrates their fierce loyalty and courage and determination, likely stemming from a strong sense of loyalty or tribal loyalty, even despite these overwhelming odds. They were willing to fight and protect their own, defending what is ungodly. They chose loyalty to their tribe rather than loyalty to God. And the Benjamites had misplaced their loyalty. Sometimes our loyalty to God means that we cannot be loyal to people. And don't let your friends or your family be more loyal to them than you are to God. Benjamin was more loyal to the Gibeonites and their wickedness than to God. They defended and upheld the wicked things that Gibeah did, and they did not punish them or correct them. Benjamin defended wickedness, and they were stubborn. Verse 18, the Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God. They said, who of us is going to fight against the Benjaminites? And the Lord replied, Judah will go first. And the next morning, the Israelites got up, they pitched camp near Gibeah. So before going to battle against the Benjaminites, the Israelites inquired of the Lord. Also see this in verse 27, and they wanted to know who should lead the fight. And this was usually done by approaching the high priest, who would use the Urim and the Thummim. So typically inquiring of the Lord involved this high priest, to provide them guidance. So if the Urim and the Thummim were used, we'll just put a little bit of context around what that is. It's possibly, well, no one exactly knows what it is. It's possibly a set of two stones. Some have them black and white, or they may have had different engravings on them. And so they were used by the high priest in ancient Israel to receive divine guidance and to make decisions. It was part of the priestly garments, and it was specifically attached inside the breastplate. The exact method of how it was used is unknown, but it's generally understood that it was used to give sort of a yes or no or positive, negative answer to a specific question. One stone would provide an affirmative answer and one stone would provide a negative answer. They would have tossed them like dice maybe, or maybe they would have selected them at random. The priest possibly progressed through the 12 tribes, from the oldest tribe to the youngest maybe. Should Reuben go first? And the answer would have been no. Or should Simeon go first? And the answer was no. Should Levi go first? The answer is no. Should Reuben go first? The answer is no. But then there's Judah. Should Judah go first? The answer that they hear from God is yes. Yes, Judah should go first. So it was important for Israel to consult the Lord before going to battle so that they were operating in accordance with his will. Obedience receives God's blessing, and God will be with them in battle if they approach it in a way that he has commanded. It is foolish for us to ask God to bless our plans, and it is much wiser and way more prudent to ask God what his plans are and to be submissive to his direction. Verse 20, the Israelites went out to fight the Benjaminites and took up battle positions against Gibeah. The Benjaminites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. But the Israelites encouraged one another again and took up their positions where they had stationed themselves that first day. So verse 22, I wonder what words of encouragement they were. Did they remind each other of the righteousness of their cause? Did they remind each other that they had actually approached the Lord in the right way and that he had spoken through the priests and it was as in the exact way that was prescribed by the law? Did they encourage each other for the justness of their cause and the justness of their fight? In the struggle, it is essential to remind ourselves that God promises it's essential for us to remind ourselves of God's promises and to surround ourselves with strong believers who encourage us to stand firm in Christ in difficult times. Verse 23, the Israelites went up and they wept before the Lord until evening, and they inquired of the Lord. They said, "Shall we go up and fight the Benjaminites, our fellow Israelites?" And the Lord said, "Go up against them." And the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time the Benjaminites came out from Gibeah to oppose them. They cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. And then all the Israelites and the whole army went up to Bethel, and they sat there weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. So even though Israel had sought God and he had commanded them to go to war, Israel had suffered great losses those first 2 days as they had fought against that smaller army, the Benjaminites. 39,000 Israelite soldiers had died in those first 2 days of battle against the Benjaminites, who only had something like 27,000 soldiers. They may have asked themselves something like, did we hear wrong for the Lord? Sometimes there are defeats even when we are inside the will of God, obeying and following his calling and direction. We can be in the very center of his will, and there can be loss and there can be suffering and there can be hardship, but it doesn't mean that we are outside the will of God just because tragedy and difficult things happen. Verse 27, and the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the Ark of the Covenant of God was there with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering it before it. They said, "Shall we go up against the Benjaminites, our fellow Israelites, or not?" And the Lord responded, "Go, for tomorrow I will give you into their hands." So a bit about the Ark of the Covenant's mentioned here in verse 27. This is the only time in the whole of the book of Judges that the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned. And during the period of time here in the Judges, the Ark of the Covenant was not consistently located within the tabernacle. The temple hadn't been built yet, but in this section, it indicates that the Ark of the Covenant was in Bethel. At the time, the tabernacle, however, was in Shiloh, some 16 kilometres away. So the Israelites inquired of the Lord while the ark was in Bethel, with Phinehas the priest ministering over it. Now, before the third battle, the Israelites again inquired of the Lord, and God said that they would win the battle tomorrow. Now, there's verses 26 to 45 provides the specifics of the strategy and the details of the battle. I'm not going to read through that. You can read that for yourself. Essentially, the Israelites killed 25,000 Benjaminite soldiers, and the tribe originally had 26,700. So the surviving soldiers, they saw smoke from the city, they realized that they were defeated, then they fled back to the wilderness where more were killed there, and only 600 Benjaminite soldiers survived. Israel didn't just deal with the homosexual sin in Gibeah, they nearly wiped out the whole tribe of Benjamin. So the whole tribe of Benjamin now only has 600 soldiers. Every other man, woman, child, township has all been obliterated. Verse 46, on that day 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant soldiers, but 600 of them turned and fled to the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed for 4 months. Then the men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything that they found. All the towns they came across they set on fire. Now God had specifically told the Israelites to fight, but he had not specifically told them to put all the towns in Benjamin to the sword, all the animals and everything they had found. They set all the towns on Benjamin on fire and killed everything in them, and God didn't specifically say that. The command that we looked at earlier in Deuteronomy 13 was that you must certainly put to the sword all who live in that town. So really, it was just Gibeah that needed to be dealt with. But this is the whole of Benjamin, the whole tribe of Benjamin that was involved in this battle. The Lord didn't require them to wipe out nearly all the members of that tribe. The response isn't justified. The Israelite army seems to have overreacted to God's call, and possibly it was driven by religious zealousness, maybe. They should have surrendered to God early. The Benjaminites they were given multiple chances to repent, and if they had, 10,000 or tens of thousands of people would have been spared. They could have just handed over the guilty men, but their disobedience cost the Benjaminites severely. We can learn that we need to surrender to God early. The longer we're disobedient toward God, the more we suffer. So spare yourselves the hardship and submit to God early. We bring difficulty and hardship upon ourselves and others when we continue in unrepentant sin. God is gracious and he is loving, and we would spare ourselves much suffering and heartache if we just repent early. Now, out of the whole tribe of Benjamin, there are only 600 men left. There's no women, there's no children, 600 men left out of the whole of the tribe of Benjamin. There's no livestock, there's no homes, there's no buildings, there's no place to live. And this is virtual genocide, for the whole tribe of Benjamin. There's no other people left in the tribe. There's only males. There's only 600 males left in the tribe. So there's no way for this tribe to repopulate. So let that just sort of sink in for a minute. This tribe of Benjamin has basically been erased from the family tree because of a reckless overreaction, and also because the Benjaminites chose to defend wickedness rather than uphold our holy God. So there is not going to be another generation of Benjaminites. It's just men. Unless the leaders of Israel can hatch a plan. So come back with me next time as we look at Judges 21. Again, it's been a pleasure spending time with you, and so I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.